Hi, friends. I'm Andy Green, and today I'm identifying my innermost fantasies and desires and finding a fun, healthy way to express them with a partner, because this is the Naked Man Podcast. This week's guest is Rachel Overvoll, a somatic sex and intimacy coach with modern intimacy and the author of Finding Feminism, a memoir that chronicles her journey breaking from a fundamentalist evangelical Christian upbringing and her healing from sexual trauma and domestic abuse. When this episode comes out, you will also be able to purchase the Breakup Journal, a book that offers hands-on interactive prompts to help you heal. Through everything that she does, Rachel is dedicated to healing, to helping people return home to their body and live a life of pleasure. I want that. I need that. I also don't quite know how to do that. So I reached out to Rachel. We recorded an introductory session that will be shared in some capacity in the future. But today we're going even deeper in our second session, and we're focusing on my fantasies and desires. Gulp. Oh no. Let's do it. Let's do it. Rachel Overvoll, welcome to the Naked Man Podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Well, how about we start with just like a little education around fantasy and desire?
Ooh.
Kind of ease into it.
I like that you immediately, that sounds great.
Okay. Okay, awesome. So I think that this can ease us into any type of more comfortability with the conversation too, just understanding the realities, the research, the science behind fantasy and desire. And there's actually a lot. And so a lot of times we can think about fantasy or desire as this like elusive thing. Maybe we have it, maybe we don't. Maybe we have a fantasy, maybe we don't. Maybe we feel desire, maybe we don't. And if we do or don't, something's wrong with us, or we're broken, or how do I get this? I can't achieve this. So let's just start with desire. Desire is not as elusive as we think, right? It's not, desire and fantasy does not mean anything about us is broken or good or bad. They're just pieces of human experiences and pieces of sexuality and sensuality that we should all have access to experiencing. So fantasy can bring up a lot. It can bring up a lot of shame and guilt. So can desire. Desire, having higher desire than your partner, having lower desire than your partner can bring up a lot of shame and guilt as well. If you're the lower desire partner, you can feel really guilty for always rejecting the higher desire partner. If you're the higher desire partner, you can feel like you're unattractive to your partner because they don't want you as much as you want them. That's a really common thing in long-term relationships as well. What you're experiencing, though, in a lot of those situations is actually spontaneous versus responsive desire. Typically, we fall into one or two categories of these. Sometimes we can switch between the two of them depending on context. But responsive desire are people with responsive desire just need a little bit more to warm them up. They don't look at their partner and they're like, let's go, I'm turned on. They need quite a bit more to rev the engine. People with spontaneous desire, on the other hand, can really just look at their partner and they're ignited. They don't need that much to rev the engine. Neither is good or bad or right or wrong. They're just two types of desire and categories that we typically fall into. So I'll start there with the desire and then we can maybe dive into fantasy.
That sounds good. And I guess in terms of desire, I think I'm pretty spontaneous, I would say, but I think it also kind of goes both. I think I am responsive in the same way. I remember saying this and it scared the shit out of Lily. I was just sort of if you're in the mood, I am, basically, and that's to me sounds very responsive, but it was just sort of I'm turned on by someone being turned on by me or just that feeling. But I think how it came out, it sounded like I was always down, or I'm running around the corner of the house being I'm ready. Rather than it just being if you're into it, I am. And that was just more of it's like a combo of the spontaneous and responsive. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, I felt a lot of what you said. I think I've been there on all those different things. Certainly feel a lot of shame about this conversation in general. But yeah, and we can go deeper into it if you wanted to talk more about the fantasy aspect of it more. But but I'm also I just know that I was like blocking myself for a bit just on even thinking about fantasies that I could share, like I think maybe having this conversation with a friend or with a partner, I don't think it'd be necessarily easy, but it being recorded and we're doing a podcast, a lot of my shame was like, this needs to be like interesting, cool fantasies or like not be just boring, like, oh, I want a threesome, and that's like, and why is that a bad thing if that's what I want, or if that's what I'm a fantasy that I have. But a lot of it was just like worrying about that judgment from other people and also feeling shame that I can just have these fantasies and where they come from. Because I think a lot of them kind of come from, like the media or even porn or something like that, and be like, that's something gross about that. And that then in turn makes me feel gross to like buy into it.
Yeah. Well, then let's start with de-shamifying this with some education around fantasies.
Yeah.
So fantasies are the maps actually to our core desires, and our core desires are what we truly want to experience in sex. A lot of times these core desires are created through unmet childhood needs or wounding. Maybe you grew up in a home where you felt really ignored, and now a lot of your fantasies revolve around being the star at the center of attention or experiencing all eyes on you. That would be an example of a fantasy healing a piece of childhood that felt like there was an unmet need. But our fantasies are nothing to be scared of. They actually teach us a lot about ourselves. Fantasies teach us how we want to be received in sex and how we want to show up. And when we map out our fantasies to really see like what our core desires are in this fantasy, we can have sex that includes a lot of transcendence and healing as well. We can get into the spiritual piece of sex and sexuality.
That sounds nice, right? Like why aren't we living our life with the best sex that we can have? Right?
Yeah. Well, shame and lack of sex education and fear, right? And there's also two types of fantasies. Yeah, many.
Ooh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. What are the two types of fantasies?
So there is repetition agency fantasy, and then there's reparative fantasy. Reparative fantasy, I'll use one example for both of them. Say I was a child, my mom came in and caught me masturbating. And now I have a lot of shame around masturbation. That's like a childhood wound, right? My sexuality was shamed at a young age. A reparative fantasy could look like, as an adult, I want my partner to watch me masturbate and tell me you're incredible, you're beautiful, you're such a good girl, I love watching you. That could be a reparative fantasy. I'm repairing a wound in that. Having the opposite experience of what happened as a child. A repetition agency fantasy, which is also just as healthy, neither is better or worse or good or bad, would be I actually want to experience the same thing that happened to me as a child, but I want to experience it through my own consent and agreement. So it would be I want to have my partner watch me masturbate, and as they do, I want them to tell me I'm a bad girl, that it's so wrong, that I'm dirty, right? The healing part of this comes through I'm doing it as an adult with consent, agency, and choice, which can be a really healing piece as well.
Right. You're taking back the power of a situation that it's like about as powerless as you can feel when being walked in on something on a very intimate moment. And then especially, I mean, depending on the parent, that could be a very lasting judgment too. It's like
absolutely.
It's one of those distinctions that seems like, I mean, they're two halves of the same whole, and that like I feel like both sides, like when you were describing them, I think they both apply to different fantasies or desires of mine too. And I think that's the therapy aspect of sex therapy is lighting my brain up right now, because I think what gets in the name sex therapy, I get hung up on, oh my God, I'm talking about sex with like kind of a stranger and sharing this with people. But also that's what I'm doing with this show in many ways. But the therapy aspect is like so healing, and the idea of going underneath these things. And I think immediately what I, thought of, and this won't surprise anyone based on like previous episodes, is foreskin play, and growing up feeling a lot of shame and feeling gross and different and bad and wrong because of being intact, being uncircumcised. But, there's a reason that I would like search out porn that had foreskin in it to see pleasure happen with like, with my own penis, or be able to have that, see that, but then also to have like a partner like own and explore and like love the part of me that I've had the most insecurity about, I think would definitely be that reparative desire.
Absolutely, the reparative fantasy. And then we can even go further of like what core desires are being met there. We could say potentially acceptance, praise.
Yes. That's true. Yeah, no, I mean, it's certainly acceptance and that praise thing. I think I'm like afraid to ever want praise, but it's also like, because it's like compliments. Like I always reject them, but at the same time, I don't want people to stop giving me compliments. I think I need those. I need the as a writer and artist, like I need that validation, even though I would like to not need that. But I think especially when it comes to, my body, and I mean, I'm happy to go into like more of my fantasies, but I think another one of the reasons of the shame or the uncomfortability with this topic for me was broaching these fantasies, broaching these desires, and having those conversations with people, and not, because I just know myself, and I know if someone asks me to do something, even if I don't want to do it, I'm working on not being a people pleaser and being guilted into something, and that's not what most people are doing, but I want to please people. I want to do that for someone. So because I know how my brain works, I am so afraid to just be like, hey, partner of mine, I really want you to, foreskin play is the one I brought up, but also like, role play in different ways about like meeting at a bar and not knowing each other, like doing that sort of thing. But I don't want it to be like pressure. I don't want it to feel like I'm, it is an ask, right? But it's also, obviously consent is a huge part of all this, and that's not what I'm trying to circumvent at all. It's more of like, I want to be very, very careful that there's not anything like, oh, I'm just going to do this for Andy because it'll make Andy happy, rather than, yes, I want to do that for you. Like, no misgivings.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of things there. It's like you trusting that your partner, that you've created a safe space for them to advocate for themselves, right? In our relationship, there is enough safety that you can say no. That's a huge piece.
Right.
And then also asking in a flirtatious or fun way of like, I can't stop thinking about role play, like meeting you at a bar. It really turns me on every time I think about it. What do you think about that? Does that turn you on? Does that excite you? What comes up for you as I explain that? So also talking about it in a curious way, instead of, I really want to do this. What about you? Instead of more ultimatum-y, having curiosity, sharing also what this would do for you. This turns me on when I think about it. This makes me so hard. This makes me so wet. Or I can't stop thinking about this with you. And every time I think about it, I'm so turned on. So explaining too the effect that this fantasy or this desire has on you, because that's an arousal, like knowing our partners are turned on by things. Maybe we don't want to do them, but even just knowing that they're turned on by thinking of us in these situations is arousing. It's like, oh, that's hot. I love that you're thinking about me in that way. Yeah.
And that would be the sort of responsive desire in some way too, right? Or, at least building on each other's desires and feeling that. And I think that like you describing it, I'm like, God, I want to be able to just do that. And getting into that space where that's just a casual conversation. And I think we get there. But sometimes that does feel like talking about how hard I am. And that was just an example you said, but I'm just like, I like part of it is just like that. Like I'm immediately like, oh, that feels aggressive, or like that feels like, there's obviously just a base shame of like talking about my own like desire and pleasure, and that like, oh, I'm really aroused by you right now. Like that feels, and I think there is just this fear, especially as a male presenting person, of just like, and I know in my partnership there is safety, but I think I've just, in terms of the world in general, I definitely just am so afraid of, being predatory or something, even though I'm not. But like that's the like fear I have, I think, around talking about just like, you know, my erection or just like how, I don't know. But obviously, and it's not that it's like there's, you know, you always want that safety and comfort in a marriage and anything, but it's not like I'm wouldn't be having this on a first date or anything like that either, which is a whole different conversation. But yeah, I can tell I'm in my classic part where I'm like, this is when I'm uncomfortable / like unsure of how to do this thing. So I try to intellectualize it or put myself down for sure, which now I'm like, oh, I wonder if there's a reparative fantasy for that in the bedroom, to remind myself to get back into my body and out of my head. You know, I think that's what sex is so great for. And I think why I yearn for it, because it is one of the few things that can ground an overactive brain like mine, or an anxious brain, or, you know, all the different things going on. I'm just sitting with that for a second.
Yeah. I think, well, and also think about the language that feels accessible to you, right? That language that I use might not feel accessible. So what language does, right? Is it, I feel really turned on when you do that. Or when I think about this, I want you so bad. Maybe that's better language for you in your relationship. I talk about sex and erections and arousal all day. So maybe some of the language I'm offering is a little bit advanced for some people, and maybe other people feel really comfortable.
Well, I mean, I don't know about advanced. Well, yeah, no, I think it's just more of like, that's funny. I feel like I don't think it's my discomfort. I don't think that would actually be crazy or hard to say, but I think it's more of the, like, if I putting that out there, the rejection part makes it harder, because it's like, it feels like there's maybe a slightly more, like there's more desire there maybe, or there's more of myself in that ask, I guess, or that it's not an ask, but like the sort of that move, I guess, or just like that flirtation. So and rejection, you mentioned at the top, you know, someone, you know, there's often someone who has more desire than the other in the partnership. And certainly that would be me. And there's no, and I've gone into shame on that, but I don't, you know, especially now that we're in poly and that Lily is dating other people and I am currently not, like there's even legitimate reasons why that would be the case. Not that, I mean, they're all legitimate reasons, but like even more evidence of why. But I think that, you know, being the person that sort of, I mean, you mentioned it, like talking about would feel unattractive or might feel that rejection more. So if I'm laying it on thicker, that makes it, I think that's my fear that I'm identifying. It'd be the fear of her being like, what? Or like, or just like, I mean, that no would feel worse than just the normal, like, hey, do you want to have sex tonight? Like that question, which is, you know, but I've been working on just like that being a casual thing rather than, and that seems to like work in some ways better than maybe the other way, where it's just like this, you know,
well, and it's setting up the context for it. So
right.
Making sure the context is available to both of you. If someone's in the middle of working and you're like, hey, you want to fuck? They're probably going to be like, no, I'm busy and I'm annoyed that you even asked me that, right? I'm in the middle of doing something. Or if someone's in the middle of like making dinner or packing for a trip, like we have to also make sure that the way in which we're asking our partners for sex or telling our partners we're interested in sex, that the context is available to us. If we're not asking or pursuing partners in the correct context, we probably will be faced with more rejection. And the other key part too is like there has to be established emotional intimacy. Only reaching for physical intimacy or reaching for physical intimacy as the gateway to emotional intimacy will always lead to rejection, because your partner is going to feel like an object or a consumable. So going through, are we in a place where I've been emotionally connecting to my partner? Are we in a place where they've been emotionally connecting to me? If that's not been present, you're probably going to feel rejection or be faced with rejection, or the sex just isn't going to be as connected because that base level of emotional intimacy isn't there, which we need before sex. A lot of people, some people
No, totally.
need it after.
I do. Yeah. Yeah. And that's an amazing point. Seems very obvious, but I think there's so many times where if there are times in our relationship where we don't have that emotional base, that what I do, sort of reach for to fix it or to get that is through a physical thing. Because it feels like, well, I do know we have chemistry there. There's a reason we do that. There's a reason we work. And so it feels like that sometimes is the easy way to get to emotion, but it's perpetuating, or it's creating that exact reality you said of like setting that emotional, that rejection, but also like, even objectifying her in that moment, but it not intentionally, but that is what's happening. And it's because I think there's a lot of training in male training that's happening there, but also this like that emotional connection, it goes both ways. And when it's not feeling for either of us or one of us, that is a really hard place to be in for me. And I think instead of, sometimes it feels like sex is the easier bridge, but I don't think that's true. But anyway, I think normally in a session, we would probably still have another 20 more minutes, but this is a podcast, and we are going to now segue into, like, I really wanted to talk to you, Rachel, about what brought you to being the person that's on the other side, that is like so far, evolved and elevated in, as you said, like the language that you use compared to me, and like knowing your upbringing. And I just want to know I want to know your story. I'd like to know what brought you to this space.
I always have a hard time answering this question. I've answered it on so many podcasts and like
You've answered on interviews. This one before.
And every time I get asked this question, I'm like, how did I get here? So let's see. I grew up, we mentioned this earlier, in a religious cult. I grew up in very, very fundamentalist evangelical Christianity. Because of that, and because of growing up in also strict abstinence only purity culture, I got engaged when I was about 19. And later that year, I broke off the engagement and left religion. I still don't know to this day of like how I found the strength. I think back at that 19-year-old girl, and I am always impressed by her. She just knew that she wasn't safe. So I left, and then I kind of started healing, I would say maybe in my early 20s, going to traditional therapy and traditional modalities of like cognitive behavior therapy, CBT, talk therapy. And I was having a really hard time actually healing from the religious trauma and feeling safe in my body, feeling like my nervous system was regulated, feeling like also my body believed this new set of, this new integrity that I had stepped into. I no longer believed a lot of the hierarchical morality that I grew up in with religion, but my body still did, even if my mind didn't. So how do I get my body then to regulate along with my new belief system? And that's when I found somatic therapy, and somatic therapy changed my life. It was I will say, probably the only modality that really made a difference to me and in the ways in which I've been able to get to this point. So then I went back to school to become a somatic sex coach, and I went back and got another degree from Kinsey, my alma mater, IU, in human sexuality and gender studies. And that's where I am today. I wrote a book too along that journey of Finding Feminism, about my journey about growing up in high control religion and leaving. And so it's been a really wild ride to get here.
I was going to segue over, but I also just want to say, like, thank you. I think it's hard to answer that question is it is a hard answer. It's a hard question. And I just appreciate your story and your strength in sharing it. And that, I feel a lot of reparative things happening in what you're doing work-wise, right? In terms of what you're and that you're sharing that with the world, which is really powerful. And so thank you for bringing us to present day Rachel. And I was just wondering, because I think already I think part of this, and I hope that listeners were feeling some commonalities in my story, my hangups and what's happening. But I was wondering, in your work with clients, I wanted to talk about that specific work a little bit. And I wanted to ask you what's an issue that is, surprisingly difficult, but super common that comes up in relationships or with your clients?
Yeah. I think the biggest, the biggest reason clients come to me is desire discrepancies, feeling desire or feeling no desire at all. Those are the two common cases I work with. And it's really awesome when I'm just able to explain kind of the science behind desire and like what's actually happening in their bodies, what's happening in their minds, and then create a pathway with them to, okay, how do we create the context? How do I know what I want? How do I talk to my partner about this? How do I also know what keeps my foot on the brakes when my partner's initiating and I don't want to have sex? What's keeping my foot on the brakes? And how do I open up this dialogue? So I'd say that's probably the most common. I also work with a lot of people just from my own background, religious trauma, and I work with a lot of men with erectile dysfunction as well. So those are kind of, I'd say, the three wheelhouses that I'm working a lot in right now.
I was going to say erogenous zones, and I apparently did anyway. But but that's okay. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it feels like what we're trained to do in, our society, probably the world over, is that think of these things as hangups or that are problems with ourselves. The desire discrepancy means there's something wrong with me, means there's something wrong with her, means there's, rather than there's science, it's not about me, it's not about her, but it also, it is, but not in this sense of like, oh, it's because of my failings as a man or as a partner, all these different things. It's more of these failures of communication and this and just sort of the things that we have internally that we've been living with. And I think that's what it seems like somatic sex coaching offers, is the ability to heal those, uncover those, and use sex as the healing ground, the healing space to not fix, but address those hangups that we have, those issues. Is there anything that surprises you in this work, or something that would maybe surprise us?
I'd say the thing that maybe not surprises me, but I don't feel like there's a lot of things that surprise me anymore. Maybe when I first started, there were things that surprised me for sure. Probably people's lack of comfort around talking about sex was a little bit surprising. I knew that it was deep, but I didn't realize it ran so deep for so many people that even hadn't grown up in religious trauma or around purity culture. The thing that I'll say frustrates me the most, or that I see the most, is the benevolent sexism in heterosexual relationships and how deeply ingrained misogyny is in our relationships. That is so frustrating to me. And it's frustrating it's difficult, I'll say, to figure out healthy ways to address this within partnerships that are otherwise appearing healthy, because both people can become defensive. No, I have a really great partner. He's incredible. And he'll say, well, I do so much around the house and I help with X, Y, and Z. And it's really taking your ego to the side to recognize the deep sexism and misogyny that is in our heterosexual relationships, even with the best of people.
That unfortunately doesn't surprise me that's prevalent. And I think there's even so many echoes of that. There's echoes of that in what I was talking about the whole time. I can see it in everything. And whether it's conscious or not. And I think it goes both ways. I know Lily has a much more, it doesn't come from me, but this need or desire to clean up feels like something that she needs to do for me. And I'm like, what? No. Or for her, it's part of her value, and it comes from childhood. It comes from what has been, and that always, it is so frustrating, because I think it does lead to defensiveness, especially because the the worst thing in the world to me would be to be like, oh, I am willingly or even unwittingly doing this, sexist practices or having that in a relationship. So I wanted to, that actually makes me think of, like, I think what I've been moved since we met originally, what I've been most moved by you and the work you're doing online is your vulnerability and honesty about your recent breakup and recent, like, I think, experience with exactly what you're talking about. And I thought, like, it seems like a hard balance as to be a sex coach, to be a therapist, be in a position of, authority, but also, like, you're helping me, you're helping us have relationships, have better sex. And then you're sharing, the problems, in quotes, that you have right now. And I was wondering how that, like, I just want to thank you, because I think that vulnerability is important, and, like, that makes me want to hire you more as a coach, at least for me. But I was just wondering, like, what kinds of things were coming up for you before, like, kind of making that conscious decision, or how you balance being, like, a real person and a coach.
Yeah, I think it's a really hard balance of sharing, this is what I'm going through, because it helps other people see the humanness, right? And realize, like, just because I do this does not mean I have perfect relationships. Just because I do this doesn't mean that sex is always easy for me, or that it's always great, or that it's so easy to talk about. I still have a lot of hangups, as we all do. I will say it's really hard finding the balance of this, because I also need to be respectful of the people I've dated or am dating and their own privacy. I've chosen to share my life with people. I've never dated anyone who has also chosen that. So being respectful of them, and also figuring out what part of my story is impactful and necessary to share, and what part of my story is just trauma dumping, because I need to be... I need to contain my own energy as well. I shared a little bit about my breakup, right? But I really didn't share the whole story with anyone online. I've shared that it was hard, that it was sudden, that there was domestic violence, but that's kind of all I've shared. And I don't know that I'll ever share more about it, because it's something that was big T trauma and came about really horrifically. But I think sharing what I've shared still allows people to see the humanity and the reality of all of our relationships, that they're not always easy, and that things can happen even when I have years and skills and knowledge and resourcing. I can end up in a healthy relationship just like anyone else.
And I'm just moved and sorry that, you experienced that, you're going through it, and of course would not ask you to go in further. And I think, like, what the sort of line that you've drawn for yourself, I think, really, what it is still welcoming people into that space and that togetherness of other people that have had the same experience. I'm inspired by you, Rachel, and just feel really honored to share this time with you, and I wanted to sort of end with one question, and it's to turn the tables slightly, but it's not in the same way. It is, what are your fantasies and desires when it comes to society and a sex positive world? Like, what are you hoping to help change about and I know this is, like, probably this is your whole life, right? And I'm trying to ask you to distill it in, like, a minute. And it's your fantasy and desire, right? So it can be anything.
So my fantasy and desire when it comes to the world is that everyone is able to live a life of pleasure, because pleasure is liberation. Pleasure is social justice. Pleasure is reclamation of our bodies in consent. Pleasure is, I deserve to feel good just because I'm human, and I don't have to do anything to earn this, or I don't have to work. It's a fuck you to capitalism. It's a fuck you to ableism and racism and everything else that are the evils in this world that really are the problems we're all facing. So my fantasy and my desire is for everyone to experience the liberation of pleasure, and to have a world that is liberated through pleasure.
I love that dream. I love that. Like, and that's, I mean, I'm with you, and my struggles with it is why I'm having you here. And I was wondering before we send off, what's one thing, I mean, maybe this is me trying to get a specific here, but what's one thing that I or a listener could do to help promote pleasure in our lives today when we get out of the car or get out of the shower or whatever we're listening to this?
Yeah. I mean, an easy thing, just touch your body and notice what it feels like. Hold your own hand and rub it. Or
I was doing that.
Yeah, perfect. Notice what it feels like too. What does it feel like for me to touch my own hand? What are the sensations that come with? As you're drinking your coffee in the morning, as you listen to this, notice, what does it feel like as I drink this coffee? What are the sensations and the pleasure that comes to me? Pleasure is a deep connection to presence and your body. Pleasure is mindfulness at the end of the day. It's mindfulness and body connection to sensation. So whatever way in which you want to do that, pursue that. And there's a really great book, Pleasure Activism. Pleasure Activism. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Pleasure Activism is a great book that talks about this. And then if you want to dive more into Desire, Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski, and then also Coming Together. Those are two good books that dive into fantasy and desire.
Amazing. Rachel, you are a font of information and sex positivity, and I thank you so much for being on the show. To foster that connection with our listeners, where can the people find you? How can they get your books? Please roll out the red carpet of Rachel.
So my books are The Breakup Journal and Finding Feminism are both available on Amazon. Finding Feminism is also in some bookstores across the U.S., so you might find it in your bookstore. And then finding me TikTok and Instagram, just at Rachel Overvoll. And then if you're interested in working together through Modern Intimacy, we do free consultations. So if this is something you're interested in working through or having support on, we can do a consultation as well.
And if you're hearing that lapping up of the dolly in the background of that water, you gotta lap up that free consultation, all right? Because that's why, like, come on, hang up the podcast, sign up for a free consultation every time. That is my mission. You know, my dream for the world is that we all take it, like, we all take the signs from the universe that are given to us, and like a free consultation is a gift. Take that gift. It's going to help you. And Rachel, you are a gift. Thank you so much for joining us again. And I'm excited for other people to see the origin story later going on. But yeah, thank you, Rachel.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Oh yeah, Dolly. Thank you, Dolly.
The star of the show.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to the Naked Man Podcast. What's your greatest desire? Mine is for you to follow and subscribe to the Naked Man Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. If this episode helped you get more comfortable identifying fantasies and desires and how to speak about them, tag us at Naked Man Pod on socials and let us know how. Next time on the Naked Man Podcast, I get my lip scrub on with beauty influencer Jacinda Pender. In the meantime, as my dad always says, be sweet.
Yeah. 1 second, my dog is like, I have an English bulldog. She's like grunting behind me. I get her to come.
Oh, is that what that noise is?
Yeah. She's like, she started grunting because she wants to play. Dolly, come here. Okay, she's calmed now. I'm petting her.